When I first moved into that apartment, I actually felt lucky. It was old, but not in a bad way, just dated. Brown brick outside, narrow hallways, heavy doors that didn't quite fit their frames anymore. The kind of place where everything had been painted over so many times that the corners looked soft. It was also one of the few places I could afford by myself. I just started a new job at a dental billing office across town, and I needed something close enough that my commute wouldn't eat half my day. The complex wasn't nice, exactly, but it was quiet. Mostly older tenants, a few younger people like me. No parties, no kids running the halls. No one really talked unless it was to hold the lobby door. My unit was on the second floor, near the back stairwell. One bedroom, one bathroom, small kitchen, old windows that stuck in the tracks. Bathroom fan that made a dry rattling sound when I turned it on. I noticed little things like that right away, but when you move into an older building, you expect it. For the first couple of months, nothing happened. I went to work, came home, heated something up, watched TV, went to bed. On weekends I cleaned, did laundry, called my mom, and told myself I was adjusting well to living alone. Then one Tuesday in late October, I got home a little after 6, unlocked my door, and saw a folded maintenance slip halfway under it from the inside. At first I just stared at it because I didn't understand how it was there. I bent down, pulled it out, and opened it. It was one of those carbon copy forms. Unit number at the top. Date. Time completed. Under work order description it said, bathroom vent repair. Then under notes, in small handwriting it said, tightened loose cover and cleared dust buildup. Fan running normally. I stood there for a second reading it over again. I never requested a bathroom vent repair. My first thought was that it belonged to someone else. Maybe a maintenance guy had the wrong unit and shoved the slip under my door by mistake, but my apartment number was written clearly at the top. I unlocked the door all the way and went inside. Nothing looked touched. The bathroom looked normal. I flipped the vent on, and it did sound a little smoother. Less rattling. That was the first moment I felt something I couldn't quite place. Not panic. More like a pause in my thinking. I remember standing in the bathroom doorway with my work bag still over my shoulder, listening to the fan, trying to think back to whether I had put in a request without remembering. Maybe over the phone, maybe in person, but I knew I hadn't. I was very careful about things like that. If I needed maintenance, I used the resident portal because I liked having a record. I called the leasing office the next morning on my break. The woman at the desk, Erica, sounded distracted, like she was answering me while doing 3 other things. I told her I'd found a maintenance completion slip for work I never requested. She asked for my unit number, put me on hold, then came back and said, "It shows here as submitted through the resident portal on Monday evening." I said that wasn't possible. She said, "Well, it's attached to your account." I asked if she could email me the request. She said I could come by the office if I wanted them to print it, but from what she could see, it was a normal maintenance ticket. Submitted online. Assigned Tuesday. Completed while resident away. That last part stuck with me. Completed while resident away. I said I never gave permission for anyone to enter while I wasn't home. She told me that if the request came through the portal, entry permission was automatically included unless I specifically selected otherwise. I told her I didn't submit it. There was a short silence, and then she said in a flatter voice, "Okay, well, it may have been entered by mistake. If it happens again, let us know." That was the end of the call. That evening I logged into the portal from my laptop. No open requests, no closed requests, nothing in the history at all. I checked my email in case there had been some automatic confirmation. Nothing. I changed my portal password anyway. I remember feeling a little stupid while I did it, like maybe I was overreacting to some boring office error. I told myself that was all it was. Then 3 days later on Friday, I got home and found another slip under the door. This one said, kitchen sink check. Completed at 2:14 p.m. Notes, checked slow drain, removed light blockage, no leak under cabinet. I actually laughed when I read it, but it wasn't because I thought it was funny. It was more like the kind of laugh that comes out when your body doesn't know what else to do. The kitchen sink had been draining slowly. I hadn't reported it. I hadn't even mentioned it to anyone. The only reason I'd thought much about it at all was because the night before, while rinsing a bowl, I'd stood there alone and said, out loud, "Why is this sink always so slow?" I said it the way people talk to themselves when no one's around. Not a real complaint, just something under my breath. I put my bag down and went straight to the sink. It was draining better. I opened the cabinet underneath. There was a faint chemical smell, like someone had used a basic drain cleaner. Not strong. Just enough that I noticed it. I checked the lock on my front door. Then I checked the windows. Then I checked the closet, under the bed, the shower curtain, everywhere. I knew how irrational that looked, even to myself. But I was alone, and someone had definitely been inside my apartment again. Nothing was missing. That was the strange part every time. Nothing was ever disturbed in a way I could point to. No drawers left open, no obvious footprints, no signs of someone going through anything personal, just those slips. And the small repairs completed, I went to the office the next morning. Erica was there, along with a maintenance supervisor I'd seen around the property before. Tall guy, late 50s maybe, with a gray mustache and a radio clipped to his belt. I explained everything again, slower this time. I told them there was no request history in my portal. I told them I had changed my password. I told them I had not given permission for anyone to enter. Erica turned her monitor slightly away from me, clicked around for a while, and said, "I can see both tickets here." I asked her to print them. She printed 2 pages and handed them over. At the top of each one was my name, my unit number, and the note, "Submitted by resident online." The request details were short. Bathroom vent making noise. Kitchen sink draining slowly. The timestamps were late, around 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. Times when I would have been home. The maintenance supervisor asked me, "Anybody else have your login?" I said no. He asked if I'd maybe submitted them from my phone and forgot. I said no again. Then I asked who had entered my apartment. He looked at the paperwork and told me the same technician had completed both jobs. A man named Luis. I asked if he was there. He wasn't. The supervisor said he could talk to him and get back to me, but he was pretty calm about all of it, almost casual, and that started to bother me more than if he had seemed concerned. It gave me the feeling that, to them, this was either very ordinary or not important. I asked if maintenance had a master key. He said of course they did. I asked who else did. He said management and emergency maintenance. I asked if there was a log every time someone entered a unit. He hesitated for maybe a second too long and said, "For work orders, yes. Not for keys, then, at least not always." I left the office with the 2 printouts folded in my purse. That night I pushed a dining chair under my front doorknob. I know those things don't really stop someone if they want to get in, but it made me feel less exposed. The next few days, nothing happened. I started convincing myself that maybe it had been some weird mix-up with an old work order system. Maybe someone in the office had duplicated requests by accident. Maybe Luis had gone into the wrong apartment twice and then written my number on the slips afterward. It didn't fully make sense, but it was easier to sit with than the alternative. Then Wednesday came. I got home and saw another slip. Window latch adjustment, completed at 1:08 p.m. Notes. Bedroom window not locking fully. Realigned latch plate. Tested okay. I didn't even open the door right away. I just stood in the hallway staring at that paper. The bedroom window had been sticking for weeks, and the latch had been loose. I'd noticed it most the night before when I was trying to close it after hearing people talking outside near the dumpsters. I remember pressing on the frame and saying, "This window doesn't even lock right." Again, I was alone when I said it. And now it had been repaired. I went inside and checked. The window locked cleanly. That was the first time I felt genuinely afraid, not because someone was entering. That was already clear by then. It was because of the pattern. They weren't random repairs. They were things I had said out loud in my apartment, usually at night, usually to myself, and then the next day there was a work order for that exact issue. I stopped moving for a minute and just listened. The refrigerator humming. A car passing outside. Someone walking above me. That was all. I tried to reason through it. Maybe the walls were thinner than I realized. Maybe a neighbor could hear me and was somehow submitting requests as a joke. But that didn't explain how they would know my login, or why the office records showed the requests coming from my portal. And it didn't explain why anyone would bother doing something that specific over and over. I called my mom that night and almost told her. But as soon as she answered, I changed my mind. I asked about her dog, her blood pressure medication, some package she was expecting. Normal conversation. I didn't say anything because I already knew how it would sound. It would sound like I was isolated and turning small apartment problems into something bigger because I lived alone and was on edge. After we hung up, I taped a strip of clear tape over the top edge of my front door and another over the bottom corner, so I'd know if it had been opened while I was at work. I also put one of my hair ties around the bathroom cabinet knob under the sink. Nothing important, just little markers. The next day, both pieces of tape were broken when I got home. There was another slip under the door. Smoke detector battery replacement. Notes. Chirping reported intermittently at night. Battery changed. Unit tested. I didn't have a chirping smoke detector. At least, not yet. I looked up. The detector above the hallway outside the bathroom looked the same as always. I dragged over a chair and stood on it. The plastic casing had fresh scuff marks near the side where it opened. I climbed down, walked into the kitchen, and just stood there. The night before, while I was getting ready for bed, I had heard a brief, sharp chirp somewhere in the hallway outside my apartment. Not inside. Outside. I remember stopping and saying out loud, "If that starts doing that all night, I'm calling maintenance, not my smoke detector." Just that. Still, someone had entered my apartment and changed the battery in mine. That was when my thinking shifted from confusion to something colder, because it meant whoever was doing this either wasn't hearing me clearly and was acting on partial pieces of what I said, or they were close enough to hear me from somewhere near my unit and decide what I probably meant. I barely slept that night. Every building sound felt personal. Pipes. Elevator movement. Someone letting a door shut downstairs. The soft vibration of footsteps in the hall. Around 1 in the morning, I got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I stayed there longer than I want to admit. The next morning, before work, I bought 2 cheap indoor cameras from a store near my office. I know that sounds obvious, like I should have done it earlier, but at that point I was still trying not to feel dramatic. Buying cameras felt like crossing a line into admitting something was seriously wrong. I set one up facing the front door and one on a shelf angled toward the kitchen and hallway. They were simple motion alert cameras linked to an app on my phone. Then I left for work. At 11:47 a.m., while I was at my desk, I got a motion notification. I opened the app immediately. The front door camera was offline. I switched to the other one, offline too. For maybe 10 seconds I just stared at my phone. Then I called the leasing office. No answer. I called again. Still no answer. I left work early and drove home with that sick buzzing feeling in my arms. When I got there was no maintenance slip. My door was locked. Nothing looked disturbed. Inside, both cameras were unplugged, not knocked over, not disconnected by accident. Unplugged carefully and set down on the counter. That was the first thing that made me feel sure this wasn't just some sloppy maintenance issue. Whoever came in had seen the cameras, understood what they were, and disabled them without taking them, like they wanted me to know they had noticed. I went straight to the office. Erica wasn't there that day. A younger guy I hadn't seen before was behind the desk. I asked if maintenance had entered my unit. He checked and said there were no open or completed work orders for that day. I asked if anyone had used a key for my apartment. He said he didn't have a way to see that. I told him someone had gone inside while I was at work and unplugged security cameras. That got his attention a little, but not enough. He asked if I wanted him to call maintenance to check for any authorized entry. I said yes. He made a call right there, listened, then told me nobody was supposed to have gone in. I asked for the manager. The manager wasn't on site. I asked when she would be back. He said tomorrow. I went home and called the police non-emergency line. An officer came out that evening. I showed him the slips, the printed work orders, the unplugged cameras, and the broken tape on the door frame. He was polite, but I could tell almost immediately that there wasn't much he could do. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. The property had master key access. From his point of view, it was a management issue unless I could prove unauthorized entry by a specific person. He did take a report. He also told me gently that if I felt unsafe, I should stay somewhere else for the night and push management to rekey the lock. So I stayed with a friend from work. The next morning, I met with the property manager. She was more serious than the others had been, at least on the surface. She apologized, said this was unacceptable, and promised to review all maintenance activity related to my unit. I asked her again how requests could be submitted from my portal without showing in my portal history. She said there could be a software sync issue. I asked if maintenance staff could generate tickets internally and mark them as resident submitted. She said they shouldn't. That wording stayed with me. Shouldn't, not couldn't. I asked specifically about Luis, the technician named on the earlier slips. She said he was off that day but would be spoken to. I asked for my locks to be changed immediately. She agreed. By that afternoon, they changed the lock on my door and gave me a new key. For about 4 days, nothing happened. No slips, no odd repairs, no signs of entry. I started to come down from it a little. Not fully, but enough that I thought maybe the lock change had solved it. Maybe one employee had been entering units casually under fake work orders, and now that management was aware, it had stopped. Then Sunday night, around 9:30, I was in my bathroom taking off my makeup when I noticed the vent cover. It was slightly crooked. Not by much, just enough that I stopped and looked at it. I stood on the closed toilet lid and touched one corner. It shifted under my fingers. Then I noticed there was a thin line around the edge where the dust didn't match, like it had been removed recently and put back. I don't know why that scared me as much as it did. Maybe because the first fake repair had been the bathroom vent. Maybe because once I looked up at it, I realized the vent opening was directly above the mirrored medicine cabinet and had a partial view into most of the bathroom. I got down and stared at it for a long time. The next morning I called out of work. I went to a hardware store, bought a screwdriver, a flashlight, and one of those cheap extendable inspection mirrors. I waited until daylight, even though I don't think that really mattered. Then I unscrewed the vent cover. Dust fell onto the sink and counter. Inside was the duct opening, and just beyond the lip of it, caught on one side where the metal bent inward, was a small black foam-covered microphone. Not part of the vent, not attached to anything in a professional way, just tucked inside with a thin wire running deeper into the duct. I remember backing away so fast I hit the shower curtain. After that, my memory gets patchier. I know I took pictures. I know my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone once. I know I did not touch the microphone again after that. I called the police. This time they came much faster. 2 officers showed up, then another, and eventually someone who photographed everything and asked better questions than the first officer had. They checked the vent and found the wire led through a gap near the duct line toward the maintenance access space between units. I don't know the exact layout. I just know one of them told me, very carefully, that it did not appear to be something installed by a previous tenant years ago and forgotten. It looked more recent than that. Management was suddenly very involved after that. The manager came to my unit in person, then someone from corporate, then a maintenance supervisor I hadn't seen before. Luis never came up in front of me again. I was asked to come to the office later that afternoon to go over records. By then I had already decided I wasn't staying there another night. My friend helped me throw essentials into trash bags and laundry baskets. Clothes, documents, laptop, toiletries, a few sentimental things. I left most of the furniture. At the office, the story changed more than once. First, they said they were still looking into whether there had been unauthorized maintenance entries. Then they said some work orders may have been created outside the resident portal and assigned improperly. Then they said one employee was no longer with the company. No one gave me a straight answer about when that happened. No one said his name unless I said it first. I asked whether any other units had complained. They told me they couldn't discuss other residents. I asked if there were cameras in the hallways. They said only at the main entrances and office areas. I asked if the maintenance spaces between units were locked. The manager said they were supposed to be. Again, supposed to be. That same week, I signed paperwork to break my lease without penalty. They refunded part of my deposit. Not all of it. I was too tired to fight over the rest. The police followed up with me twice after I moved out. I gave them copies of the slips, screenshots from the camera app showing the offline alerts, photos of the microphone, and the printed work orders. They told me they were investigating. That was the word they used. Investigating. Not solved, not resolved. I looked up the complex online a month later and saw that maintenance staffing had changed. That's all I could really confirm. I never got a formal explanation. No one ever sat me down and said, "This is exactly what happened," but I have my own idea. I think whoever was doing it had access to vacant or service spaces around the units. I think they were listening from inside the walls or vents, hearing residents mention small problems out loud, then using those details to create work orders that gave them a reason to enter apartments during the day. Maybe to look around, maybe for the feeling of access itself, maybe just because they could. What still bothers me is how ordinary they kept it. That's the part I think about the most. If something had been stolen, or if the apartment had been trashed, or if there had been some obvious break-in, I would have understood the shape of it sooner. It would have looked like a crime right away. Instead, it was all made to feel helpful. A fixed vent, a better drain, a working latch, paperwork under the door, routine notes in pen. It took me longer than it should have to understand that someone can violate your space without leaving it looking violated. I live somewhere else now. Newer building, different side of town. I still rent, but I don't say anything out loud in my apartment if I can help it. That sounds extreme, and maybe it is, but I still catch myself sometimes. I'll be rinsing a dish or trying to open a window, and I'll feel the words forming in my throat, just some harmless complaint to nobody. And then I stop. Because for a while, every time I did that, someone was listening.